Hi, Hunter Hastings here. In our Value Creators project recently, we've been highlighting the state of business education, which also means the state of business thinking. One precedes the other. Today, we're going to highlight one of the flawed concepts of business schools and business education, and that is the concept of leadership. We're presented by business schools and business coaches with this image of charismatic leaders with special vision, disruptive strategies, and formidable implementation powers who lead us mere followers to levels of achievement of which we'd be otherwise incapable. These leaders are coached, they're shaped, they're enabled by the leadership industry. Is this another business school concept that we should be skeptical of? Yes, says today's guest, Dr. Elias Aboujaoude. He's a Stanford professor, he's a researcher, he's an author. He writes about major issues in contemporary culture, including business culture. As a professor of psychiatry, he's able to understand the psychological impacts of cultural phenomena. He understands the psychology of leadership, which he can separate from the artificially manufactured traits that are highlighted by the leadership industry. Dr. Aboujaoude's work is broad-based and global. He's lectured to audiences in over 20 countries, and he's been published everywhere from Forbes to Psychology Today.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
Dr. Aboujaoude, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And you've given me permission to call you Elias from now on, so I will do that.
Please do. Please do.
So we're talking about your book, Elias, A Leader's Destiny. And you make a very interesting point about what you call the leadership industrial complex.
Yes.
What that suggested to me was that leadership as a concept that's taught in business school and written about in business books and elsewhere is manufactured and inauthentic, but that's my interpretation. So tell us about the leadership industrial complex.
Yes, I think you captured it rather well, Hunter. So the leadership industrial complex speaks to an obsession, a culture-wide obsession we have with leadership. And in trying to analyze this obsession, I looked at both the demand and the supply. If the leadership industrial complex represents the supply, we, the consumers, represent the demand. And it's a pretty healthy demand. We're the ones sending our toddlers to daycare centers with names like Little Leaders or Leadership Academy. We're the ones signing up for leadership studies majors as English and history go the way of Latin and the classics. We're the ones participating in this culture-wide title inflation phenomenon that now exists, where every other person wants to be a chief, you name it, officer, and where we have to take titles like chief spirituality officer and chief pastry officer seriously. So there's clearly demand, but the leadership industrial complex is not just passively meeting this demand. It's whipping it up into a frenzy through very intense marketing and very sophisticated advertising by selling us the notion that leadership is now a science that this leadership industry has mastered and can basically deliver it to us for the right price. And because they're sending the message that leadership is now supposedly universally accessible, the leadership industrial complex ends up giving us an inferiority complex where we stop feeling worthwhile unless we have a leadership position. So I think by looking at both the demand and the supply sides of the equation, it does add up to a pretty unhealthy leadership culture, and to leadership having become a lucrative business as opposed to something that's fundamentally about psychology, personality, and character.
So that's an interesting way of framing it. I'm an economist, and so the supply-demand analysis is really interesting there. So we believe that production, supply, creates its own demand. And in many cases, that's a simplification of Say's law. But where did it start? You do say that we crave leadership. On the other hand, we've got this manufacturing process of supposed leadership. Do you have a concept of how it arose?
So we're hardwired in a sense to seek leaders. Humans are tribal animals, and in the wild, leaderless packs are vulnerable. They don't get to pass their genes on. They don't get to secure food for their offspring. So there is a built-in hardwired craving for leadership. The problem is that society has evolved in a way that has turned us into a flat culture where we have become allergic to any hierarchy, whether it's between teacher and student, parent and child, or even doctor and patient. So we have these two sort of conflicting dynamics. On the one hand, we live in a flatter, more horizontal society. On the other hand, we're still hardwired to seek leaders, and we're looking for them in all the wrong places. And we'll talk more about that, of course.
Well, yes, you say, in fact, that in a sense, the leadership we're supplied with is not the leadership we demand. And you call it a crisis of poor leadership, the title of leadership over its substance. So go there, that characterize the crisis. Why is there a crisis today?
Well, you would think that with all the knowledge that we supposedly have today about how to produce good leaders, with all the science that we have supposedly accumulated about what makes a good leader, you would think that there would be more inspiring examples of leaders we look up to and are proud of. You would think that there would be more transcendental acts by transcendental leaders. You would think that there would be a true broadening in the profile of how of who becomes a leader. But none of this is true, and in fact, the opposite may be true. We've been preoccupied recently, of course, by this epidemic of leadership failure in academia. But for a while now, leadership failure in corporate culture and in politics has continued unabated. Now, if I were a business school administrator, I would say that the leadership industry is not big enough. We need more executive coaches, we need more leadership boot camps, and we will solve this problem. But I'm a psychiatrist, and the diagnosis I make of this crisis is that we have deluded ourselves into thinking that anyone can be a leader. We've minimized the role of psychology, of character, of personality along the way, and given all sorts of ill-suited individuals a way to visualize a path to the top. So by taking this production line conveyor belt approach to leaders, it becomes harder to stand out. And this gives narcissists and sociopaths, those who are willing to take an end justifies the means approach, gives them a leg up and enriches leadership culture with these unsavory personality traits. So all this has added up to a true leadership crisis that I try to dissect in my book.
Yeah, and another suggestion you make in the book, Elias, is that this is at least partially a function of what we're starting to call the attention economy, that the social media and other developments in technology and society are starting to make all of us demand attention. We've got to find a way to get attention. And those who crave leadership, maybe it's a subset of that. Maybe it's some function of the attention economy. Is that part of the analysis?
Well, this is really interesting. I think if you think of this fascination with disruption, for example, right? Like it's one of the most repeated buzzwords in leadership marketing and leadership culture. I think there was a survey from KPMG not that long ago that showed that 86% of CEOs view themselves as disruptive forces, and that's a lot more disruptors out there than Uber style disruptions that we can actually point to. So, this raises the question of what is it about disruption that is attracting all this interest. And I think there is an element of attention seeking, a way to stand out in this overly populated leadership culture. And you get a lot more attention breaking things than patiently building them up or patiently putting them together. So I think part of the obsession with disruption has indeed something to do with attention seeking. In psychiatry, disruption doesn't have nearly the same positive charge that it has in leadership culture and in business culture. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the big Bible, if you will, of psychiatric diagnoses, has at least a couple of categories and a couple of diagnoses with disruption as part of them, including disruptive behavior disorders. So I think it may be time to just inject a slight negative charge in the concept of disruption and leadership culture as well, and to start focusing instead on building things as opposed to breaking them apart, even if building gets you less retweets and less potential for going viral.
Well, let's go into the psychology, Elias. That you say that we're taking leadership wrongly. We're thinking of it, conceiving of it wrongly, and its foundations lie in psychology. Help us with that. How should we be thinking about leadership? Is there leadership in business, or we're just misconceiving a psychological principle in some way?
Well, leadership, I believe, is primarily about psychology. One symptom of how we've come to minimize psychology and personality in leadership culture is this focus on executive coaching. Coaching is one leg that the leadership industry stands on, and coaches are over-promising and under-delivering when it comes to leadership. They're being set up to fail, in a sense, by a leadership industry that wants us to believe that these professionals, who for the most part don't have any formal psychological training, that they're so good that they can essentially remold personality and change character in a way that transforms someone who is not leadership material into leadership goal. Now, while I personally welcome any new helping profession and have a lot of respect for the coaches I've interacted with, I think the reliance on coaches has served to minimize the role of psychology and has resulted in a class of leaders who are coached to death, but just as lost when it comes to understanding their personal psychology and how it does or does not align with the needs of leadership. Now, to be sure, there is a place for coaching when it comes to career advice or how to navigate office politics or how to help with things like body language, nonverbal cues, posture, etc. That I accept. However, the idea that you can take someone who is in it for himself and turn this person into the model of a leader who's there to lift others, that's a tall order indeed, and one that no executive coach, in my opinion, can deliver on.
Yeah, and you say in the book, Elias, it turns out that personality is pretty sticky. So the claim of being able to moderate or mediate it or change it is false.
Yeah, and it's really striking when you look at actual personality studies. So there's one that tracked Harvard graduates and assessed them at age 22 and again at age 67. And the core personality structure was really quite stable over all these decades. Another study that looked at even younger individuals, students aged 6 to 12, and assessed them on a long list of personality traits, and then re-interviewed them again 40 years later. And once again, personality structure was quite stable. Now, psychoanalysis, which has tried to work on people's personalities, is notorious for being a long-term strategy, not for the commitment phobic. An article from New York Magazine from a few years ago was titled, "Sorry, your time is not up." So the idea that we can change personality over a weekend leadership boot camp, or a 4-week hybrid model that's run by executive coaches, really rubs me, and I think any person with mental health background, the wrong way, because it seems so foreign to what we experience as clinicians and as scholars in the personality and psychology field. The two sort of leading voices in personality research and our field, Paul Costa and Robert McCrae, made this very strong conclusion following many decades of researching this issue. And we're really struck by how over the course of a lifetime, people marry, divorce, remarry, they change several jobs, they move multiple times, they get widowed, they read hundreds of books, they watch thousands of movies, yet across the lifespan, the core personality structure is often rather sticky and not malleable. So all this is to say that this promising that we can turn someone into a leader with the right personality to lead, again, is bound to be unsuccessful.
And you also point out that the coaching industry tends to make it formulaic. I don't understand much about psychology, but it's certainly not formulaic. And you mentioned the 4 C's and 9 proven steps for this and PACE and things like that. So instead of being qualitative and non-formulaic, we go in the opposite direction. Just follow these steps.
It's really interesting, Hunter. You're talking about the mnemonics that populate so much of leadership teaching, and mnemonics have become a symbol of this let's give you a crash course in leadership approach of the leadership industry. Mnemonics make possible offerings such as the Leadership Express series, which by its very name suggests that leadership is something that you can pick up quickly if you master, a relatively small number of hacks and tips that we can teach you. Now, these simplistic tools are being sold as a science. Basically, apply these formulas, and you're guaranteed a successful income, a successful outcome. Pretty much, but not only is it being sold as a science, it's being sold as an easy science. A science that's based on these easy to remember mnemonics. It becomes as easy as ABC practically. But the problem, of course, is that there's no data to support this, and the more you research the field, the more you come out with the uncomfortable conclusion that the supposed science of leadership is there to support the business of leadership. By giving the impression that leadership studies is a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math, by giving the illusion that it's a STEM field, you are no longer allowed to criticize it the way some people will criticize liberal arts degrees, for example. You can no longer say that it doesn't increase your employability, that it doesn't increase your marketability, that it's not a good return on investment. It becomes a science, and you're more likely to sign up, thereby supporting the business that leadership studies has become.
Yeah, this is a really interesting problem for business, Elias. We worry about this in various kinds of ways. One of the themes that's being involved right now is left hemisphere dominance. That comes from Ian McGilchrist. I'm sure you're familiar with that series, that we want everything to be lists and mathematics and plans and strategies and so on, as opposed to human values. Or another way we think about it as economists is subjectivism is one school of economics. It's about human choices. But the other school is positivism. It's about GDP and mathematics and planning controls and things like that. So you're applying the same problem, I think, to management. You say to leadership. You say that leaders are mostly born, or they happen as a result of context or environment or circumstances. So tell us about that, but also help us think about how do we get people to accept that in this leadership industry world?
Yeah, I think we get people to accept it by moving away from the business of leadership and back to leadership as a state of the mind. Because as long as you approach leadership as a business, then you're marketing it as something that's universally applicable and universally useful, and it's hard to do that without intensifying the demand for leaders and leadership positions. So one fix to this problem that we're in is to move away from the business of leadership, and I would say from even the pseudoscience of leadership, to re-emphasize the role of psychology.
Right, as opposed to scientism or pseudoscience, as you put it.
Absolutely. So
one way to think about that is the uniqueness of people. Every person's unique. We can't put them into a folder or a box called leadership. You tell some nice stories about Herb Kelleher at Southwest in the book. So individual uniqueness might lead to the emergence of leadership. Is that a way to say it?
Yes, I think it should all be about individual uniqueness, and what you're seeing instead now is this business of branding, where there's a checklist of supposed traits and skills that should be available, and becoming a leader turns into sort of a quest to check all these boxes, whether you truly meet them or not, as opposed to supporting truly unique individuals, such as Mr. Kelleher, whom you mentioned and that I profile in the book.
Mm-hmm. We're delighted to announce the Value Creators online course for entrepreneurs in every kind of business, big, small, or medium, at every stage, in every industry. Our course provides the foundations and principles on which to build success. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to creativity, innovation, and competitively superior business action. There are 11 foundational principles or mental models that together cohere into the value business model. Principles for value generation, principles for value operations, principles for value finance and accounting, and principles for value sustainability, as well as the new knowledge accumulation you'll need for continuous innovation. These principles are delivered by top business professors from top business schools: Mark Packard, Per Byland, Gordon Miller, David Rapp, and Bart Vanderhagen. You'll find video lessons from them, along with downloadable tools, processes, and other valuable content. Master these lessons, and you'll master the most important skill in business: value creation. go to thevaluecreators.com and click the course link. You also mentioned Steve Jobs, and you say one of his traits was mysterious. So there's some magic and uncertainty in leadership, perhaps, but presumably that comes from individual uniqueness again.
It does come from individual uniqueness, and it's a trait that is really, I believe, under appreciated. I talk about Steve Jobs being inscrutable to some degree, very secretive in a way that allows people to project whatever sort of visions and hopes they have on him, because he was so unknown in a way. When his engineers were working on the iPad, they thought they were working on either a large cell phone or a small laptop. This is the degree of secretiveness that he embraced in his professional life, but also in his personal life. You'd be hard pressed to find a picture of Steve Jobs, being a regular citizen, or and all this, I think, adds to his mystique and continues to feed his legacy to this day. What we're seeing instead in so much of leadership culture is this oversharing on social media, and leaders often confuse it with being authentic or justify it as a way to own and control your message. But I think in doing so, they really end up diminishing themselves. I talk about Queen Elizabeth also in my book, who over 7 decades of her reign remained essentially an unknown person, and this allowed people from sort of all different positions of the political spectrum to be able to project again their wishes and visions on her in a way that allowed her to, I think, keep her country together through 7 decades of tremendous change and turmoil, and that turned her into the example of soft power and the importance of soft power. Again, very different examples of leading we're witnessing today on social media, with desperate attempts to go viral and saturate our lives with superfluous details about our leaders.
What about charisma, Elias? You mentioned it in the book. I'm not clear how to think about it. Is charisma something that a follower creates in a leader, or can a leader cultivate their own charisma? Tell us about charisma.
That's another problematic concept in leadership today, insofar as just like we are claiming we can turn almost anyone into reasonable raw material for leadership, we are also claiming that we can teach charisma. You can go on Coursera and take a course into how you can become charismatic. Now, when you look at the roots of the word charisma, the Greek root refers to a favor freely given. The Christian root refers to a gift from the Holy Spirit. So saying that you can teach charisma essentially is the equivalent of saying that is the equivalent of playing God, which is an irony that's lost on many purveyors of charisma enhancing courses that are out there.
Just take these steps.
That's right. Nine tips, 10 steps, 11 skills, and you'll become,
Right.
a symbol of charismatic disposition.
We'll send you a charisma certificate. You mentioned followers. I'm not sure whether that's the right word, but in order for there to be leadership, there have to be followers. And maybe we don't like to be followers, but maybe we're collaborators. So take us there. Take us to the other side of leadership. How do we be good followers, and how do we promote following in a positive sense, building good companies that maybe have a leader but have lots of followers that are productive? Tell us about following.
Yeah, I think the the problem in so much of leadership culture is that we forget about followers, that we're only interested in followers to the extent that we can turn them into leaders. There's a basic mathematical reality that we ignore in so doing, and that's that the world also needs followers, and that not all people can be leaders. What we're doing to followers is giving them an inferiority complex, is making them feel worthless if they don't succeed to be leaders, or if they're not interested simply in leading. And this narrative has to change. But I see very little genuine interest in that, in so much of leadership culture, when again I think it should be all about following, and in a sense, and to the extent that that leaders are rated or considered successful, it's in their ability to lift others. But again, so much of leadership culture today emphasizes narcissistic self-love in leaders themselves, rather than genuine concern for the rest of the culture.
Well, one of the experiments that's going on now in business is the idea of distributed leadership, it's sometimes called. So the unit of analysis is teams working together in a collaborative context, and individuals can step up to quote unquote lead in a certain context or a certain situation because they have the most knowledge.
Yes.
That's most relevant to the problem being addressed at that time. So leadership becomes, as you said, contextual. Is
Yes.
that valid, do you think? Is that the way to think?
I think it's an interesting way to look at it. You're also alluding maybe to a style of leadership that's been called democratic leadership, where everybody sort of gets a chance at leading. And this is a concept that was studied as early as the 1930s by Kurt Lewin initially. And what they found out was democratic leadership can enhance group morale and make for a more sort of collegial kind of working environment. But it can also be inefficient, and it can also be a luxury that the organization cannot afford at times of crisis, when decisions have to be made efficiently, quickly, and so there are downsides to it. But to go back to the premise of a flat society or a flat organization, it's hard to be completely horizontal and to be totally distributive in leadership roles and still call it leadership. I mean, leadership involves some degree of a hierarchical distribution of roles, and if there's none of that, then is it really leadership? I think it's a question, but
Well, I'm willing to go with the thought experiment of no leadership. I think it's it's attractive. So the conceptual structure there would be, as you say, it's a network. The individuals are nodes and networks. They're connected by information flows. That's what the information theorists say. And it's about how information flows between those nodes and those individuals. It's not leadership, it's data. Is there any
Yeah,
validity to that?
and I think it could be that because of all the technologically mediated flattening and horizontality that we talked about, that it may be the only sort of honest form of leadership that there is, but more research is clearly needed on that.
Yeah, it's a fantasy right now, but it's an interesting one. So let's go to the culture. You've alluded to that a couple of times, but is there any chance in our culture that we can have good leadership today? We've got this attention economy. We've got the narcissism that you refer to in the book of leadership. We hate hierarchy, so we're bad followers. What's the prospect culturally for leadership today?
I think we live in very challenging times for leadership, and I talk about three main areas of challenge, and I talk about the allergy that we've developed to hierarchy, and that's, we touched on that. In medicine, it's something that we see with patients self-diagnosing through Dr. Google and coming to us for a second opinion, or to prescribe a medication that they know through their online research is the one that will work for them. I talk in my book about the reversal of the parent-child dynamic when it comes to all things technology related. When it comes to social media, video games, texting, these are all phenomena that very much started with teens and tweens and then became completely universally adopted across the entire age bracket. Parents regularly learn from their children now about all things, again, related to their social media accounts, or how to maximize your chances of going viral, or whatever skills they need to acquire in that domain. So there's a true flattening that's quite new, and that goes against the ability to develop a stable leadership culture. Another obstacle I talk about is the total absence of privacy. So much of civilization has been about protecting the individual from the state, the religion, the tribe. The individual right now is under a very harsh microscope, and it doesn't take facial recognition to accept that. Just look at social media and how we now have pictures of our fetuses online before our kids are born. So the lack of privacy makes it impossible to project on our leaders our sort of best case scenarios for what we want them to turn out to be. I talk in my book about Obama and how he was such an unknown figure, relatively speaking, when he became president, that people were able to project all these wonderful expectations on him, and to even give him a Nobel Prize 9 months into his presidency before he really had a chance to accomplish much. So the ability to project on leaders is a very important component of successful leadership. And this has become seriously compromised because we simply know too much about our leaders. It's all on Instagram waiting to be Googled. And this compromises, again, our ability to project our dreams and aspirations on them and makes us more doubtful that they can succeed at representing us and lifting us. A third challenge I talk about is the persistence of bias, deep, implicit, unconscious bias. In the case of anti women bias, it reduces by 50% essentially the pool of eligible leaders that we can choose from. So whether it's the total lack of privacy, the reversal of hierarchy, and the lack of true equality because of this persistent bias, all these are real challenges to leadership culture. And the leadership industry doesn't even come close to addressing them. So I think we need a true sort of exercise in deep cultural reflection and to have a chance at rescuing leadership culture, thereby rescuing culture in general. And this cannot happen without dropping this business that leadership has become, and going back to issues of psychology, of personality, of character that I think are so fundamental to leadership that I've turned into the subtitle for my book. And finally, again, pay attention to followers again, and not just for their leadership potential, but for who they are as persons and as a fundamental element of leadership culture that we have somehow come to ignore and minimize.
So that's a big challenge, the deep cultural reflection. A couple of thoughts that you've provoked, though they might not be sufficiently deep. But one is we try to highlight the role of empathy, and a leader could be one that has the best, whether it's skills or traits or capability of empathy with followers, and in business case, customers. Is that a place? Is empathy a trait, or I don't know what to call it, an activity, a mindset that we could build on?
Absolutely. So empathy is considered part of emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence is a proven quality in leaders who succeed as leaders. So we need to enrich our leadership culture with emotionally intelligent, empathic leaders. The problem is that the approach that we've taken often nurtures opposite traits like narcissism, even sociopathy. But we absolutely should go back to this notion of the empathic, emotionally intelligent leader. Absolutely.
That there's Adam Smith's book, Theory of Moral Sentiments, begins with that. He calls it sympathy, but he means empathy in modern language. That is the essential trait. And then the other point that I just want to touch on before we leave is understanding luck and serendipity. So, we talk about our leaders in business anyway. They've created these great companies. They've won these great battles. They've disrupted, as you say. But a lot of it is just luck and being in the right place at the right time. But we don't appreciate that. How can we appreciate it?
Well, we can go back to Napoleon's example. One of the greatest military leaders of all time. Apparently, when he was considering promoting a general, he told an associate, well, I know he's good, but is he lucky? So Napoleon himself understood the importance of luck in being able to succeed, the importance of being at the right place at the right time. I think there's elements of serendipity and the role of serendipity in that too. So Warren Buffett talks about making time for serendipity. Steve Jobs talked about planned serendipity. So all these leaders have appreciated the role that luck plays, and it's hard to look at lists like 8 tips or 9 skills or 10 hacks or whatever, and to see the incredible self-confidence that they have, and think that anyone is appreciating the role of luck or serendipity and how great leaders happen. So I think we need a little bit of humility and acknowledgement that as much as we prep, as much as we develop ourselves as leaders, as much as we as many courses as we take, there are things that are not under our control, and we don't, I think, acknowledge that nearly as much as we should. Now, we talked about how leadership likes to think of itself as a science. Well, we know from the history of science that essentially 50% of great scientific discoveries happen serendipitously. Penicillin is an example of that. Cisplatin, which is a universally used chemotherapy drug, is an example of that. So even the sciences have acknowledged a role for luck and serendipity. So why can't leadership culture and the leadership industry?
So last question, tell us whether you're optimistic or not. Do you think that we will solve this leadership crisis, and that we will learn to appreciate luck and serendipity and let leadership emerge and have leaders who are born and naturally come to their position? Or will we continue in this entropy that we have right now?
Before I became interested in leadership, I did a lot of work in the intersection of technology and psychology. And when I wrote my book, Virtually You, years ago, questioning so much of what was going on on social media and with video games and cyberbullying and all of that, I was quite pessimistic and sort of a lone voice, if you will, in Silicon Valley. Fast forward a number of years, and people are more conscious and much more accepting of the downsides that have come with these technologies and the need to act and do something and try to reverse the clock. And I think something similar may happen with leadership as we continue this discussion that I hope my book is contributing to. I think if you look at all the attention that recent spectacular leadership failures have gotten in the press from academic leadership and other areas of leadership, there is sort of a rising chorus of people really wondering where we have taken leadership culture and how it's become an absolute necessity to correct course. So based on that, and based on my experience in a different field, I allow myself to be optimistic. But the path is long, and the battle is very uphill.
Well, the book is A Leader's Destiny, and I highly recommend to anybody listening, anybody in management or business in general, or just thinking about society, to read it. It's truly eye-opening. It makes you think differently, challenges a lot of conventional wisdom, and points up to a lot of issues in our current thinking. So it's really well worth the time to take to read it. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it. I was excited by it. So thank you
very much. Thank you very much, Hunter. Pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode, and check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.